with knowledge, and with all that comes great responsibility.
Going back to kind of when we began talking in this segment, people are strong critters, and brains are strong things, and you do a lot of things with your brain. And I am a strong believer in the fact that you can manifest things with your mind. And I'm not talking about magical things. We're not talking about like Harry Potter waving a wand.
Are you talking about that Oprah thing where it was like The Secret? You ever hear about that?
Yeah, I've heard about The Secret.
I know some people who I really respect who okay, I'll tell you a funny story real quick. You ready about this? So some people I really love and respect, got into this, but they know I'm confined by the boundaries of Scripture because that's what I've chose to serve, okay? So they think that I'm like a square dude maybe, and they're scared to tell me about this. Dude, I think outside the box, right?
Oh, yeah, that's why I love you, man.
Yeah. See, I might be confined by the Scriptures personally, but I still visit about everything because I'm trying to expand my knowledge. But at any rate, so this Oprah thing came out, The Secret, and it was everyone thought it was cool, oh, it's a secret, therefore we have to act like it's a secret. It's a marketing freaking amazing nightmare that they've created.
The secret isn't anything but what? Positive thinking?
Well, it's kind of what she said, but in more of a stupid fashion, though.
Well, yeah.
She said it in a very true way.
If you're going to try to market something as simple as positive thinking, you're going to have to dumb it down. Because you just can't say your thoughts manifest themselves into words.
Here's where it gets into the cuckoo puff level guru science mode, in my humble opinion, and I'm open for correction at any time. But so the idea, the gist I get from it is hey, and I was told by someone else who knows these people who I love and respect, there's this thing called The Secret. Did you hear about it? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I don't pay attention to Oprah, right? And so I didn't know what they're talking about. Well, if you think about it, the positive energy will shoot out and it will change the situation. I'm like, well, my problem is I read physics textbooks. So I'm like, which energy might that be? What are you talking about? Electromagnetic radiation? Is that what you're talking about? You're talking about electrons, protons? Which actual physical energy are you talking about? Negative energy. I'm like, negative charge electrically? What are we talking about?
Dark matter.
Because it ain't in the physics book yet. Okay? Well, I don't think it is in there. But it's I think what they're using to describe it's a guru science is really sloppily explaining a different effect, which is true. Okay? And this is the way I see the whole positive energy thing. I think that it actually does work that way. If you, if I decide, man, I really want to, have this greenhouse up on a hill, and because that'd be so crazy. I'd love it. That's my dream, right? And I just think about it all day, and I sit there and and I think about this greenhouse on the hill. Eventually,
that's going to become a reality.
It will become a reality because it'll manifest itself physically because it is programmed in my brain as a goal. Yeah. And then all my actions line up in sometimes subconsciously, and it might seem like magic, but maybe I just didn't pay attention to how it become manifest through my actions, right?
Speaking of which, ties nicely into a favorite quote of mine. The thought manifests itself as the word manifests itself as the deed develops into habit, and habit hardens into character.
There you go.
So everything begins with our thoughts. That's from the Buddha, by the way, who they attribute it to. But it all starts with your thoughts, and then that shapes everything else. And then eventually your thoughts become the world around you. Mm-hmm. And, it's just an order of operations. And
it's just a general observation of how stuff works. And I think that if you did want to take it on the fringe of the spiritual, I would still even be open to that because science is observation, but there's stuff that hasn't been observed until the technology advanced far enough to notice it, right? And the ancients have always observed there to be spiritual powers, right?
Oh, yeah. And it's the quote from Bill Hicks that we opened up with. How many scientific research studies have been done on the effects of hallucinogenic drugs and what you can learn about the human experience? Because we are all part of this greater machine. Everything functions in the same fashion, whether it's on a cellular level or whether it's the galaxies that we live inside of. Everything functions on the same platform and the same fashion. And once you realize these things, none of it's that complicated. Sure. So you can go back to ancient civilizations that have taken ayahuasca or any kind of drugs to change their thinking. And they've done that for a reason. Humans naturally seek an altered sense of consciousness. It's why little kids will spin around until they get dizzy, because it makes you feel different. Sobriety gets boring. But there are answers in there. I firmly believe, in my opinion, if you dig deep enough and you look in the right directions, there are answers there, but you're not going to read them in a science book because it's not something that you can quantify. Because
science has not developed the technology to quantify it.
Exactly.
It's like if you would ask a scientist from 500 years ago about like, hey, explain radio waves, man. And he'd be like, what are you talking about? And he'd get out his wood ruler and he'd get out his like scale and his hourglass with the sand coming out of it. And it's like, you know, in his compass and his square, and he would not be able to figure out what the heck you're talking about with a radio wave. He'd say you're a witch and you're talking about magical spiritual energy that don't exist. They just didn't have the tools yet, man.
Exactly.
Well, the human brain is an incredibly finely tuned biological computer, and I would not be surprised one day because collectively, like as a scientific observation, almost 90% of people on Earth have had spiritual experiences, right? Supernatural is what I'm talking. Like I'm a scientist, so that's kind of the hard part for me is like I want to find the physical explanation for everything. And that's my default position. However, I'm still in science, you got to always be open for other possibilities too. And I have to admit from that perspective that maybe there's other forms of energy that we cannot register on our crude equipment on Earth.
Amen.
But it is able to be received by the pineal gland of the brain or by the other collective like resonation of this other stuff amongst people, right? There's something that whispers to us, or it could be encoded in the computer program of our brain. Who knows, dude? But like, so this stuff...
There is something there, though, isn't there?
There is. I think
there
so.
Is.
Because like the collective observation of mankind for the last 6,000 years or whatever it's been, you know, since they've been paying attention to that stuff, has like all pointed in the same direction, that there's something else going on beyond this veil that we can't see, man. Mm-hmm. And physicists are slowly catching up to like, okay, there's other physical dimensions. We figured it out on paper, but like we can't really explain it in terms of three-dimensional. We're three-dimensional critters stuck in a multi-dimensional universe beyond that, possibly. Who knows? And the physicists are at least contemplating it. But maybe if you do manifest something, maybe you are communicating with the higher power and it knows, or the forces know that, like, and it all lines up. I don't know how this deal works, man. It's crazy.
Well, in something that it makes me think about, I mean, we're talking about, you know, they're talking about the secret and this is something new and this and that, whatever. On a spiritual level, people have been praying forever, for forever and a day. And that to me is the same sort of manifestation I'm talking about. People pray for something and they ask for it to happen and they think about it and they do this and they will it to happen over and over and over again, maybe with tons of people in one big synagogue, you know. The more people doing it, they think the more likely it is to happen. Well, it's more people wanting the same thing to happen and manifesting this thing with, you know, not just with their minds, but I think on a spiritual level too. It's that persistence and that idea and that determination for it to become a reality. You know, people are extremely intelligent even when they don't mean to be. And I think that, you know, turning on those subconscious waves and those things that we don't normally harness ourselves can kind of make a reality for ourselves without even meaning to.
Yeah, because honestly, the mechanism of the human mind is something that is so vaguely understood by really smart people. Like you look at microbiology, you talk about chaperonins and all these microscopic things that repair proteins, like, and just the mechanisms of like how stuff is like transported inside the cytoplasm of a cell, and people, their brains explode. And they're trying to figure out how these things can have a consciousness and a sense of purpose to do their job. And no one even knows, like the more they refine the microscopes and the telescopes, is the more their brains explode. Like there's so much, dude. Wisdom tells you that the more you think you know, the more you realize you don't know nothing.
Exactly.
And that's kind of my experience too. So I'm always open-minded, but I'm always affixed by collective experience and observation because I see value in common points as triangulating in on the truth. And if 7 billion people said that something happened, maybe something happened. You know what I mean? It's a lot better than one dude randomly poking out in the air. So I'm open to the possibility of the whole spiritual world, like actually affecting the physical world, man. It's totally possible. And now in terms of like, we always look at it in the medieval light, You know what I'm saying? As far as like ghosts and goblins and all this stuff, but that's just an ancient way of explaining it. You know what I mean? And nowadays, if people want to have more scientific explanations, that could be made from a creative-minded guy. But I think that a lot of people are talking about the same thing, just using different language.
Exactly. And that's why we haven't come up with any solid answers yet, is because everybody's approaching this from different angles and using different vernacular and trying to prove different points that are all actually, at the end of the day, the same thing. And you say the microscopes and the telescopes, they get better and better, and the less we know, and we always look out for answers, when at the end of the day, maybe we should look inside and see what we can find inside ourselves.
And that jars an interesting point too, bro, is like, we're talking about this stuff, and it's so interesting to contemplate like origins and existence and the mechanics of how these things work. And I think we're supposed to, because if we're living in the image of God, right, then we would want to contemplate those things to like magnify his awesomeness, you know what I mean? And all
Absolutely.
this. But at the same time, it's funny because like, as interesting as those things are, the people who were like the most awesome in those categories of like the most respected spiritual guys, like let's say Jesus, right? Like, what did he focus on? Did he tell us all about how physics works? Did he tell us all about like the history of the dinosaurs, or like how this other stuff happened, or whatever? You know, like, I mean, he could have got into some scientific stuff if he's the Son of God, right? And he sure could have, right? I mean, if he had the connection to that deal. But what was his? He was here to solve a problem. And most of the spiritual leader guys throughout time are here to correct major issues, which like, it's interesting, like, we're such curious critters that the curiosity almost kills a cat, because like we like shoot past the obvious shortcomings. Like his main message was like, quit being an asshole. You know what I mean? That's the second great commandment. Love God and love each other like you love yourselves. You know, like if we can accomplish those two basic principles, dude, like life will not suck. It will be okay.
And it's pretty simple too.
Right.
And there's no reason to try to explain it scientifically, because you don't need to. Love isn't something that you can quantify with science, I don't think, anyway.
It can't be quantified, but it can be qualified. It can be the general trend of advancing the survival of the species.
Absolutely.
Because our species, like I said, that's the only thing we have going for us is like cohesiveness and taking care of each other, because we're weak, man. We don't have all that tackle, like I said earlier. Like, we don't have a turtle shell. Dude, if something attacks me, I don't got a shell to go inside. I have to build one called a house.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
But yeah, there's definitely energy out there, guys. And like, have you ever been have something weird happen to you? You said like 90% of the people on Earth have had something supernatural, and that can be on any level. Whether you're just, I know I've had it happen where I'm thinking about somebody, and then they'll call me and haven't heard from them in a long time, and it's like maybe there was a little psychic message somewhere. I remember when I was in the 5th grade, my teacher, we were having class, and she told the class that her husband was down in Denver for the weekend, and I got so it's just a chilling just thing that went through my spine and just a pit in my stomach. And I was like, man, something bad's going to happen. And I had no idea. I didn't tell anybody about that. But the next day, he had totaled his car on the interstate and just about died. And
wow.
Yeah, just weird stuff like that. And I'm a firm believer that there's a method of communication that we have available, but yet we choose to be blind to, because we're restricted by our perception. Yeah, we don't open our mind to it.
We have mistakenly chosen that we understand it all, because the new religion is science. Now, science in its true nature is just observation, but if you make that into a religion, it degenerates into a religious attitude, which means like we are now superior. Once you've decided that you're smart because you're a scientist, you have ceased to be a scientist, because you are now not open for correction and reproof and like, you know, going through the entire scientific method of retesting, because you're now adhering to something. Dude, if a scientist is arguing a point, you know what I mean? Defending it, that's fine. But like at a certain point, you are going against a scientific method, because you are like fighting against continued observation to re-verify. If something is truly a law in physics or in some whatever field it is, you should not be scared to re-explore that. Right?
Exactly.
So a true scientist will be very open-minded, but incredibly skeptical at the same time. Open-minded for any possibility. Is there a purple guy inside the core of the earth with 12 arms that pulls levers to drive the furnace that shoots volcano lava out? It could be. I kind of don't think so. It sounds stupid to me, and I'll be honest. But maybe, and a scientist would actually have to like, okay, is there any observation data that supports this idea? And then look at it. And there probably ain't none because it sounds stupid. But if there was, that's just an example of like the attitude we should have. Incredibly open-minded, but at the same time, be like, okay, show me where. Did you hear a lever get pulled? Well, yes, I did. Did you hear him grumbling down there? What happened? Did you drill a hole and look at him? Can you see it with a seismograph? Who is this purple guy? How did he get there? What's his job? What's his, so you got to be skeptical. You got to ask all the questions and you have to verify it through actual observation, not just through imagination, which is the problem. Where science has devolved into a religion, it is on the grounds of speculation and adherence to those principles religiously.
And those scientists now become religious figures.
Yeah.
And as you said before, famously, Rex, I love Jesus, but I don't play religion.
I don't play religion, man.
And there is a line
adhere
there.
to what I hold to be true religiously. Okay.
But we don't play it.
I don't invent my own religion though around it. And I don't subscribe to other people's religions. Really. I don't. Now the truths can be religiously adhered to, right? Like truth, there's a couple certain base principles that I love. I adhere to that religiously. I don't care. Like, I just know in my biology that's the one that squirts out the right chemical. And it's like everything's saying like, dude, like this is what you need to do or you will die. And your offspring will never make it, and no one will ever make it, and everyone who loves you and all this. It's part of like the species is advancing the continuation of the species.
That's some deeply seated biological stuff. It's down there.
Right.
It's in there with your conscience, and it's in there way deep with that voice that tells you what's right from wrong.
Absolutely. And I have a deep respect for ancient observations that have seemed to cohesively and uniformly stay on board with that love resonance message too. So when you look at a lot of these ancient writings, like the Gospels, or if you want to look at the Torah or things like this, which are communicating a story, which in context is
English is just a language. Numbers, quantifiable evidence, that's all just a method of communication to try to get your message across to the other person that you're talking to.
Right.
And we said before, JC, the rest of them, they didn't need science books because they had a message of love. Mm-hmm. And they told that through stories, a different method of communication. But at the end of the day, it's all pretty simple.
Mm-hmm. It is simple.
It's the golden law.
As far as the stuff that we need to rely on for our basic survival. Now, for advancement technologically, that's dangerous though. See, we talked about the hydrogen bombs problem, right? The more creative we get and the more we ponder these other questions and try to understand our surrounding universe more is cool if the base is covered first. The love part has to be there, because if it ain't, you're only going to use that power, that tool, in an evil way. Like we talked about earlier about tools. Mm-hmm. I can use a hammer to build shit, or I can use a hammer to kill people. You know what I mean? So you got to be careful. And the more radical tools you invent, the more responsibility you have, man. So you can't you got to be careful. You know what I mean?
True story. And there's nothing more powerful than tools of religion and schools of thought.
Well, let me put it like this. Here's a weird quote of the day that I just invented. This is Rex's quote of the day. I don't think Homo sapiens deserve to have the technology we have progressed to yet. We can't handle it.